Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to do something a little different.
Yeah, a bit of a departure for us.
Right. So I want you to just imagine for a moment that you're sitting in your favorite chair. Maybe you've got a glass of wine or, a hot cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
The lights are dimmed. The house is completely quiet. It's that specific time of night where the world just feels a little, I don't know, permeable.
Oh, absolutely. Permeable is the perfect word for it.
Because today we aren't just looking at a standard text. We are actually looking at the architecture of reality itself. We're going to talk about the things that go bump in the night, but definitely not in the way you might expect. We're looking at that thin veil between realities.
And it is a incredibly fascinating area because usually when we discuss the paranormal or ghosts or telepathy, we're dealing with folklore.
Right, the campfire stories.
Exactly. We're dealing with jump scares and things that are basically designed to frighten you.
Yeah.
But what we have on the table today is it's something entirely different. It presents itself almost as a physics lecture.
Yeah.
It's domestic, it's grounded, it's surprisingly practical. But the implications of it completely dismantle how we think the physical world actually works.
They really do. So we are diving deep into session 245 of the early sessions, book 6 of the Seth Material.
A classic.
Truly, and the date of record here is March 28, 1966. But before we even start unraveling this mystery, I do have to state for the record, this podcast is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are here to explore, to analyze, and to learn together.
And we definitely need to make sure we give proper credit where it's due to.
Always.
The source material we are analyzing today comes from the New Awareness Network. They are the publishers responsible for keeping this dense, complex, and frankly life-changing material available to the public.
So here is our mission for today's deep dive. We aren't just telling a spooky ghost story. The world has plenty of those.
Too many, maybe.
Right. The mission here is to actually understand the mechanics behind the haunting. We're going to look at telepathy not as a magic trick, but as a biological function. And oddly enough, we're going to get some interior design advice from a non-physical entity.
Which is wild.
It is. Advice that might actually change how you work from home.
It sounds like a really disparate mix, honestly. Ghosts, telepathy from Wyoming, and room dividers.
Yeah.
But in the Seth Material, everything is profoundly connected through this core concept of focus.
Okay, let's set the scene for you. We have Jane Roberts, the author and medium who speaks for the entity known as Seth. We have her husband, Robert Butts, who Seth calls Joseph, and he is dutifully taking notes in shorthand.
Right.
Usually the weird stuff is entirely contained within the actual session. Jane goes into a trance, Seth speaks, she wakes up, they go have a beer.
That's very controlled.
Exactly. But in this particular session, the paranormal activity isn't just happening during the trance, it's bleeding over into their waking lives.
And that is exactly what makes session 245 stand out so much. Usually the weirdness is highly theoretical. But here, the session is explaining strange things that happened while they were making coffee or doing yoga or just sleeping. The containment breaks.
Which brings us to our hook, the ghost in the bedroom incident. And to be clear, this isn't a story Jane heard from a friend of a friend. This happened to her while she was fully awake.
And it is chilling. But what I really love about Seth's explanation, which we are definitely going to get to, is that he frames it as a lesson in frequency overlap.
Yes.
It's not spooky in the traditional Hollywood sense. It's physics. It's the literal physics of consciousness.
So let's unpack this. Segment 1, The Lady in Blue.
Let's do it.
So the session starts with Rob's notes. He's documenting something Jane told him about Thursday night, March 24th. This is a few days before the session itself. Jane wakes up in the middle of the night. It's dark. Complete silence in the apartment, and she just looks over at Rob's side of the bed.
And this right here is the absolute nightmare scenario for most people. You wake up, you look over, and you expect to see your partner sleeping. Or maybe the glowing numbers on the alarm clock. You're in that beta-theta bridge state, just sort of groggy and vulnerable.
Right. But Jane sees a woman standing there, standing right by Rob's side of the bed, just looming over him.
Now, hold on. This is where the specific detail gets so critical.
Yeah.
Because usually, people describe ghosts as misty or white or shadowy figures, indistinct blobs of gray.
Right.
And if you are hallucinating in a dark room, your brain usually just projects shadows because that's all your physical eyes can actually see.
Exactly. But Jane is incredibly specific. She describes a woman who is rather thin and fairly tall. But here is the detail that gave me literal goosebumps.
The color.
Yes. The room is dark, right, middle of the night. But Jane says she can see the woman's dress is blue. It's a one-piece dress, moderate length, and it is blue.
We really need to pause and think about the physics of that for a second. In a pitch black room, or even a very dimly lit room, the human eye cannot perceive color.
It just can't.
The rods and cones in our retinas just don't work that way. If there is no light source to bounce off an object, blue should just look gray or black.
That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought of the biology of it. So the fact that she saw blue means she wasn't actually seeing with her eyes at all.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That is our very first clue, that this wasn't a physical perception. If she were seeing with her physical eyes, she would see a silhouette. The fact that she perceived blue and described it so vividly tells us she was using what Seth calls the inner senses.
Wow.
She was perceiving the energy frequency of the entity, and her brain was translating it into a visual format, a blue dress, that her conscious mind could understand.
And she also mentions seeing the bookcase behind the woman.
The cream-colored bookcase, yes.
Yeah.
She notes that the cream color of the bookcase was clearly visible right behind the woman, even though the rest of the room was entirely dark. This implies a depth of field that shouldn't exist in a pitch-black room. It's like she had night vision goggles on, but for consciousness. She was seeing the energy of the object and the person, which kind of carries its own light.
That makes total sense. Her brain was rendering a 3D scene based on pure data, not on light particles. But then the classic ghost interaction happens. Jane focuses on the figure. She tries to really look at it. She tries to lock onto it with her conscious, analytical daytime mind. And what happens?
Poof, gone.
Gone, the second she locks onto it. But then she reports a very strange sensation immediately after. She says she had the distinct feeling that something was trying to make me forget what I saw.
That is fascinating.
It really is, isn't it? She had to quickly shake Rob awake and tell him what happened because she felt the memory literally slipping away like a dream fading the second you wake up. It sounds almost malicious, like a Men in Black memory wipe. Look at the flashy thing, forget the ghost.
It definitely feels that way when you experience it, but Seth explains it quite differently later on. It's not an external attack from the ghost. It's actually an internal defense mechanism.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Our conscious ego is designed specifically to focus on physical reality. It's built to handle taxes, gravity, traffic, and making dinner.
Right, survival stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when it encounters data that violently violates the rules of physical reality, like a glowing woman in a blue dress appearing in a pitch-dark room, the conscious mind just rejects it.
So her brain is basically throwing up an error code saying, this file is corrupt, delete, nothing to see here.
Exactly that. Data does not compute. Delete. So that eerie sensation of forgetting was actually just her own mind, trying to restore order to her reality. She had to violently shake herself awake and verbalize it to Rob immediately, or the memory would have just dissolved.
So they obviously go into the session on March 28th with questions. They want to know, who was the lady in blue? Was it a hallucination? Was Jane just half asleep and dreaming?
And Seth, in his usual very direct manner, steps in and says what she saw was not a hallucination.
Validates it right out of the gate.
Completely. He calls it a survival personality, which is Seth's technical term for what we call a ghost or a spirit, someone who has survived physical death.
But the mechanics he describes, this is where it gets really interesting, Wummy. He says Jane wasn't using her physical senses at all. She had switched to a completely different focus.
Right. He says she switched her focus of perception. Think of it like a radio dial. Usually our dial is stuck on 98.6 FM physical reality. We hear the music, the news, the static of our daily lives. Jane, in that drowsy, half-awake, middle-of-the-night state, accidentally bumped the dial. She slid over to, say, 99.1 FM.
And on 99.1 FM, there was a woman standing there.
Precisely, and this is the key point. Seth says the woman was standing motionless in her own system.
In her own system?
Yes. She wasn't actually in Jane and Rob's bedroom in the spatial way we think of it. She was in her own reality, her own space. But for a split second, Jane's system and the woman's system coincided.
So it's basically an overlap, a double exposure.
A double exposure is a perfect analogy. The woman isn't haunting Rob. She isn't staring at him while he sleeps. In her reality, she might be standing in a field or a different room entirely, or just lost in thought. But spatially, in terms of coordinate points, she happens to occupy the same space. Jane just happened to see through the veil for a second.
And Seth actually explains who she was, right? Because Jane didn't recognize this woman at all.
Correct. Seth says the ghost wasn't there for Rob or Jane. She actually had a connection to the house itself. Specifically, she was a friend of the woman who lived in the apartment upstairs, a neighbor named Lucy.
Oh, right. Rob notes later in the book that Lucy had a friend who died a few months prior.
And Lucy had actually inherited that dead friend's television set.
That is such a ridiculously mundane detail, but it completely anchors the whole phenomenon in reality. So this lady in blue was just a friend of the upstairs neighbor, maybe revisiting a place associated with her friend, or the TV, or just the building itself.
And because she was confused, which we're going to get into heavily later, she's just sort of lingering. But the major takeaway here, and what I want you listening to really grasp, is that we are likely surrounded by these survival personalities all the time.
That is, is that comforting or terrifying? I really can't decide. It completely changes the dynamic of fear. If I wake up tonight and see a shadow person, my immediate instinct is always, it's coming for me. But you're saying, based on Seth's physics, it's more likely I'm just accidentally eavesdropping on a different channel.
That is exactly it. It's just a signal leak. You aren't being hunted by a demon. You're just picking up stray static from a neighboring reality. It's just physics. They are on their frequency. We are on ours. We usually pass right through each other without ever knowing. It's only when we drift into that dissociated, relaxed state that the signals bleed over.
Just a signal leak. I am absolutely going to tell myself that next time I see a shadow move in the corner of my eye, it's just a signal leak, nothing to worry about.
It is honestly the most rational way to view it. It removes all the melodrama and replaces it with pure mechanics.
Okay, let's shift gears from the visual to the auditory. Because just a few days later, Rob Joseph has his own brush with the unexplained. This brings us to segment 2, the Wyoming wiretap.
I love this title, the Wyoming wiretap.
Yeah.
Because that is exactly what it was.
So tell everyone what happened to Rob.
It's Monday, March 28th, the exact same day as the session we're discussing. Rob is doing his daily yoga practice in the living room.
Which Seth is a huge fan of, by the way.
Oh, massive fan. He often compliments Rob on his discipline with the physical body. So Rob finishes his yoga routine. He's lying down on the rug, feeling very passive, very drowsy, that amazing post-exercise bliss state.
The corpse pose.
Presumably, yes. And suddenly he just starts hearing voices.
Like voices inside his head? Or out loud in the room?
He says he heard them with exceptional clarity, sentence by sentence. You could actually hear the distinct timbre of their voices. It was a vague passing thought. It was a high-definition audio transmission.
And he sees something too, doesn't he?
He does. He sees one of the men speaking. He describes him clearly, thin, maybe in his 30s, straight brown hair, friendly face. He even hears this man laugh in a very deep, pleasant way.
And Rob is just lying on his rug in Elmira, New York, watching this happen like a movie playing behind his eyelids.
Exactly. And then, just like Jane, he forgets the specific words they were saying almost immediately, which again is that waking mind trying to scrub the anomalous data.
Right. So they asked Seth about this during a session, basically saying, hey, was I going crazy? Who were those guys?
And Seth confirms it right away. It was a telepathic tune-in. Rob had inadvertently turned his internal receiver on.
And where were these men located?
Seth says they were in Wyoming.
Wyoming. That's halfway across the country. That is over 2,000 miles away from New York.
Seth is quite specific about the geography. He says the location starts with an S sound.
Sheridan. Sundance.
Rob actually speculates it might be Cisco later on, but Seth mentions a mountainous country, northwest portion of the state. And he describes the room they were in, a large cabin-type room, unadorned, no rug.
No rug.
No.
Seth loves to throw in these highly specific interior design details.
He really does. But it verifies the perception. It contrasts with the rug Rob was lying on. Seth says the room was simple. And then he explains why Rob tuned into them specifically.
Yeah, why them? Out of all the millions of people in the world, why some random guys in a cabin in Wyoming?
Resonance. Like attracts like. Seth says the young man Rob saw, the friendly one with the brown hair, is someone much like yourself, as far as personal characteristics and temperament are concerned.
So Rob didn't just dial a random phone number in his head. He dialed his own exact vibrational equivalent.
Precisely. Telepathy follows the path of least resistance. It flows naturally along emotional and psychological similarities. Rob was in a deeply passive, open state from the yoga. He naturally resonated with this stranger in Wyoming who just happened to have a similar vibration.
But here is the real kicker. Seth says the people in Wyoming subconsciously felt Rob's presence.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way street.
It absolutely can be.
Right.
Seth says, and I'm quoting here, had conditions been better, it is possible that they would have sensed you more directly or even formed a telepathic image of you as you formed one of them.
Imagine that. You're just sitting in a cabin in Wyoming having a beer and a chat with your buddy, and suddenly You see a ghostly, translucent image of a guy in yoga pants lying on the floor in New York, floating in the corner of your unadorned room.
You'd immediately think, oh my God, I saw a ghost. This cabin is haunted. But really, you just saw a telepathic projection of Rob chilling after a workout.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
And Seth actually drops a massive truth bomb right here about how we perceive each other.
Yeah.
He says essentially that physical images of other people are always basically telepathic images formed by the perceiver.
Yes. That is a very heavy concept to digest. He implies that even when I look at you sitting right across from me at this table, I am actively using telepathy to construct your image in my mind. My physical eyes take in the light bouncing off you, sure, but the actual construction of you as a continuous person in my reality is a mental telepathic act.
Telepathy isn't a superpower. It's the absolute bedrock of all communication. We just usually do it at a very close range with physical light assisting us. Rob just did it long range without the physical light.
It really blurs the line between seeing, hallucinating, and telepathy. It's all just data processing at the end of the day. Hallucination and vision are just degrees of the exact same cognitive process.
And the key to Rob's experience was his state of mind, passivity.
Seth talks a lot about this. He says passivity is a vital tool.
Right. We live in a culture that highly values action. Go, 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 hustle, make it happen.
Grind set.
Exactly. But Seth says passivity, that state of just being, of total openness, is completely essential for receiving this kind of non-physical information. Rob's yoga put him in that receptive state. You literally cannot receive a signal if you are constantly broadcasting your own noise. You have to shut up, mentally speaking, to actually hear the universe.
But there's a serious warning attached to that, too.
Yes. The need for balance. Seth says, your energies afterwards, however, should be directed outward. You can't just stay in that gooey, passive bliss state forever. You have to take that received energy and consciously push it back out into the physical world. Otherwise, you become ungrounded. You get spacey.
So tune in, get the cosmic download, and then immediately go do the dishes.
Essentially, yes. Ground the energy in physical reality.
I really love that. Okay, speaking of tuning in and getting signals, let's move to segment 3, the envelope experiment. This is a recurring segment in their sessions, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The envelope experiments were Rob's way of constantly testing Seth's and Jane's clairvoyance. Rob was a skeptic at heart, or at least he really wanted to maintain scientific rigor with the phenomenon. So he would take an item, put it in a sealed double envelope. Jane would hold it to her forehead while in trance and try to describe exactly what was inside.
It's the classic parapsychology psychic test.
It is. And in session 245, the object in the envelope was a pair of cards regarding the Sabin oral polio vaccine.
For our listeners who didn't grow up in the 60s, the polio vaccine was a massive deal. And the Sabin vaccine was distinct because it wasn't a shot in the arm.
Right. It was actually given on pink sugar cubes.
You'd literally just eat a sugar cube with the medicine dropped right on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Rob has these specific cards in the envelope that are reminders or official records of them taking this vaccine. It had text on it like wife and self, family groups, and some dates.
So how did Jane do on the test?
It's a completely fascinating mix of hits and noise. And the noise is actually way more educational than the hits. It's a good news, bad news situation.
Okay, let's start with the hits.
Okay. Jane, speaking as that Seth and Jane blend says, a connection with a merger. On the card, Rob had explicitly written wife and self, a marriage, a merger.
Check. That's a solid hit.
Then she says, squares.
The sugar cubes.
Exactly. The vaccine was literally on square sugar cubes. She perceived the physical shape associated with the historical event.
That's a very direct hit.
She says, family group. And the card specifically mentions family groups.
Another hit.
And she also gets April. The card had a spring gate reference on it.
So she's definitely picking up distinct, accurate data points, but then she completely goes off the rails a bit.
She really does. And this is exactly where the human filter comes into play. Her mind latches onto the concept of family group. But instead of sticking with the sterile vaccine card in the envelope, her brain immediately jumps to her own family trauma.
She starts describing a letter from her parents, doesn't she?
Yes. She starts talking about a letter from her father and her mother, who is an invalid. She gets highly confused. She actually feels that the data is wrong, but she can't stop the flow of it. She takes the raw data of family and weaves a completely wrong narrative around it based on her own deep-seated anxieties.
And Seth steps in to explain this mess, and it's honestly kind of funny.
It is very rare to hear a cosmic entity admit defeat, but Seth basically says, look, we tried.
He says, and I quote, "We got involved finally with his father in an effort to get him away from your family, but I am afraid we did not succeed."
It's hilarious. It sounds exactly like Seth is a driving instructor and Jane just drove the car straight into a ditch. Imagine Seth trying to steer the car smoothly and Jane is just frantically yanking the steering wheel toward issues with Dad.
It really humanizes the whole channeling process. It proves that channeling isn't just perfect dictation, it's co-creation. It's a high-stakes game of telephone.
Right.
The entity sends a raw concept like square, health, family. The medium's physical brain then has to frantically find matching files in its own personal library to describe it. Jane's library for family and health was completely dominated by her mother's severe illness, so the signal got routed straight there.
Exactly. Seth calls it noise. He was actively trying to lead her to the concept of her mother, who is an invalid, to connect to the broader idea of illness or polio. It was meant to be an associative bridge, but Jane got totally stuck on the bridge. She got stuck on mother and father and just couldn't get across to polio.
That is such a brilliant explanation of how human intuition works in general. You get a flash of symbol, and your brain immediately tries to tell a rational story about it. And often the story is completely wrong, even if the initial symbol was right.
Yes.
That explains so much about why psychics are often half right. They get the symbol perfectly, but absolutely botch the interpretation.
Exactly. The square was right, the family was right, the interpretation was pure personal projection.
So amidst all this intense psychic testing, Seth suddenly pivots to some very domestic advice. He starts talking about furniture.
The famous room divider.
I laughed out loud reading this part of the transcript. You have this disembodied voice explaining the complex physics of the universe, and then he just stops and says, "Rupert needs a room divider."
Context is key here, though. Jane and Rob lived in a very small apartment. Jane wrote and channeled in the exact same physical space where they lived their daily lives. Seth insists that Rob put up a room divider to separate Jane's working area.
Is this just about, like, 1960s feng shui?
It's actually about profound psychological triggers. It sounds trivial, but it's highly advanced advice on environmental psychology. Seth says the divider may only be a symbol, but it is a necessary one. It is the symbol for discipline.
That is profound. It's not just a piece of plywood, it's a psychological boundary.
Seth is saying that to be effective, especially for someone as psychically sensitive as Jane, you absolutely need to compartmentalize. Jane absorbed the energy of the entire room. If she was sitting in the living space, she felt domestic and distracted. She needed a physical demarcation to tell her subconscious, okay, when we step behind this plywood, we are writers. We are professional. We are not thinking about the laundry.
It separates life from creation.
And Seth explicitly links this to overriding the vicissitudes of mood. If you rely on just feeling like it to get to work, you will never get anything done. The divider is a physical, external anchor for an internal state of discipline.
That is advice literally every remote worker needs to hear today. How many millions of people are working from their kitchen tables right now, blending everything together?
Millions. And Seth would tell every single one of them, get a divider, or change the lighting, or wear specific work shoes. Create a physical divider. Even if it's just a specific lamp you turn on when it's time to work, it tells your subconscious, we are shifting modes right now. You can't just wait to feel creative. You have to create a sturdy container for that creativity.
I love that. Seth's guide to home office productivity, it's practical magic.
It really is.
Yeah.
Actively controlling your physical environment to control your mental focus.
Okay, we have covered the ghost, the wiretap, and the sugar cubes. But we really have to address the elephant in the room now. Or rather, the ghost in the room.
Segment 4, Death and Confusion.
Rob asks the exact question we were all thinking while reading this. Did the ghost woman know she was dead? Did she even know Jane was there?
And Seth's answer is, well, it's definitely not the Disney version of the afterlife.
No, it is not. Usually, we are taught to think, you die, you see the beautiful white light, you get met by grandma, and suddenly you possess the answers to the entire universe.
Seth says absolutely not. He says, and this is crucial, death does not automatically bring enlightenment or development. Those that are muddled continue to be muddled.
That is the absolute quote of the deep dive for me. Those that are muddled continue to be muddled.
It is a cold splash of water to the face. It is Arguably the most sobering sentence in the entire session. We have this deeply romanticized idea that dying is an automatic upgrade, that as soon as you shed the physical body, you gain infinite wisdom, you understand the cosmos, you immediately become a spirit guide.
And Seth is saying, no, you are still you. It implies that your consciousness is a continuous thread.
Exactly. If you were deeply confused, highly anxious, and intensely attached to your neighbor's TV set in physical life, you were going to be confused, anxious, and attached to that exact same TV set in death. Dropping the physical body doesn't suddenly raise your spiritual IQ.
That is actually terrifying.
It is. Seth explains that this woman knew she had changed. He compares the transition to simply walking into a new room. You know you are in a new room, sure, but that doesn't magically mean you know why you are there or what the rules of the new room are.
So she was just standing there in her own system, probably wondering where her friend Lucy went.
Exactly. She wasn't haunting in any malicious sense. She was just existing, stalled out. She was attached to the location, maybe looking for her friend, but she completely lacked the mental clarity to process her situation or to move on.
Seth mentions that individual differences always operate, right?
Right. If you are a developed personality, if you are curious, aware, and self-reflective in life, then when you die, you handle that transition well. You look around, you analyze the new data, and you move forward. But if you lived your entire life with blinders on, you keep the blinders. If you are a zombie walking through your physical life right now, you will absolutely zombie walk through the afterlife.
This is a huge, massive motivation to do the internal work now.
It is the ultimate argument for personal development. You aren't just improving your current life. You are literally preparing for your death. You are actively building the spiritual muscle you will require to navigate the next reality.
So do not wait for death to make you smart.
Exactly. If you want to be wise then, you have to be wise now. If you want to be aware then, you must practice awareness now.
And that ties perfectly back to the ghost. Jane was able to perceive her because Jane actively works on expanding her awareness. The ghost didn't see Jane because the ghost was, for lack of a better phrase, completely out to lunch.
Precisely. The ghost was trapped in her own little confused feedback loop. Jane was the one expanding her horizons and stretching her inner senses. The ghost was operating on a very low, stagnant frequency of awareness.
It really reframes the whole fear of ghosts thing for me. Instead of being terrified of them, maybe we should just feel a little bad for them.
Compassion is probably the most appropriate response. They are just people who got stuck in the doorway.
Stuck in the doorway. I really like that image.
And remember, Seth says passivity helps you tune into these things, but action and applied knowledge are what help you move forward. The ghost was passive, but in a totally stagnant way. Rob was passive in a receptive, healthy way, but then he acts on it. That is the balance we need.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Whether you're driving to work or folding laundry or hopefully not seeing a lady in a blue dress standing in your bedroom.
I think the ultimate synthesis here is about the reality of the thin veil.
It's not a solid wall.
It is not a wall at all. It is a highly permeable membrane. And Session 245 proves to us that reality is leaky. Ghosts leak in. Telepathic conversations from guys in Wyoming leak in. Past emotional associations with sick parents leak into scientific psychic experiments.
And instead of fearing those leaks, we should actively study them.
We must understand the mechanics. Once you say, oh, that's just a frequency overlap, or oh, that's just my subconscious filtering raw data, when you understand the mechanics, you completely lose the fear. And when you lose the fear, you gain immense clarity. You learn to recognize, oh, that's just a signal, instead of panicking and thinking, I'm going crazy.
And Seth gives us a very practical test for all this, doesn't he? A way to measure if we're actually getting anywhere with all this woo-woo metaphysical stuff.
Yes. The literal litmus test for spiritual work. He tells Rob directly, the sessions, the material, and your new knowledge must transform your psychic and physical environment, your health, and all aspects of your inner and outer life for the better.
It has to actually work. It has to be tangible and practical.
If you are studying high-level metaphysics, but your personal life is a complete mess, your health is falling apart, and you are chronically miserable, you aren't applying the knowledge correctly. It should lead to exuberant health and a much better physical environment.
Even if that just means going to the hardware store and buying a room divider.
Especially if it means buying a room divider. It's not just about floating around on the astral plane. It's about making the physical plane work optimally for you while you're here.
Integration. I love it.
It really is all about integration.
Now, we have barely even scratched the surface of the Seth material today. We looked deeply at just one single session. There are hundreds of them.
Thousands of pages. And every single one of them is exactly this dense with profound insight.
So here is our call to action for you. Don't just take our word for it. Don't just listen to our summary and move on. You need to go to the source material.
We strongly encourage you to study the Seth Material books directly. Read the raw transcripts for yourself. Read Jane's very honest notes about her own doubts and fears. Read Seth's highly specific phrasing. You will absolutely find nuances in there that we couldn't possibly cover in a single deep dive.
You can find all of them at the New Awareness Network website and bookstore. That URL is sethcenter.com/the early sessions. Go there, buy a physical book, support the preservation of this incredible material. I promise you it will completely change the way you look at your own bedroom in the dark.
Guaranteed, it's an investment in your own conscious clarity.
And right before we go, I have a thought I want to leave you with, a little philosophical brainworm to take with you into your week.
Let's hear it.
Seth said the ghost woman was just standing in her own reality, completely minding her own business. She was the protagonist of her own movie. And Jane, completely by accident, tuned her in. The ghost didn't even know Jane was there watching her.
Right.
If that's true, who might be tuning you in right now? Who might be sitting in a different dimension or a future time, waking up in their version of a bed, seeing you standing there, folding your laundry or driving your car and thinking that you are the ghost?
That gives me absolute chills. We are all someone else's ghost.
We are all someone else's ghost, just standing in our own system, broadcasting our signal out to Wyoming or far beyond, hopefully not too muddled.
Hopefully not. Let's all strive to keep the signal clear.
Thank you for diving deep with us today.
It's been a real pleasure.
This podcast is distributed free of charge for educational purposes. Keep your frequency clear, watch out for those accidental wiretaps from Wyoming, and we will see you in the next reality.
Okay, goodbye, everyone.